For those of you who are watching us online, you're watching Procurious Big Ideas Summit broadcast from Zurich right here in Switzerland. Our theme today is Reach Your Summit, and we have a fantastic lineup of speakers who are showing us how procurement and supply professionals can supercharge their careers and reach peak performance across a whole range of areas.
We've already had a fascinating morning. We're about halfway through the day now. We've had an excellent speaker lineup, including Procurious founder Tanya Siri, who talked about how procurement professionals and the profession itself can reach its summit, followed by Jürgen Nielis, who shared some practical advice on how to stand on your supplier's shoulders and enable supplier innovation. We had Joël Payom demonstrating how to unlock the benefits of supplier diversity, Nick Dobney talking about how to use language to get ahead in your career, and John Everett giving some practical advice on what we need to do to close the gender gap, which is still widening at some levels in the profession. We've also discussed some of our latest research findings, along with interview compilations, on-the-couch videos, best of Procurious countdowns, and lots more. So if you've missed anything or you want to share some of these insights with your peers, do visit the Procurious Learning section, where we've broken up these videos and saved them as short micro-learning clips in our video library.
Hugo, moving on to part 3, what can we expect?
In keeping with our Reach the Summit theme, the third part of the day is Adapt or Perish. So any mountaineer worth his or her salt knows that there's always going to be a challenge when you're climbing a summit. Things never go to plan. And if you think about some of the great mountain disasters and survival stories out there, for instance, the 1996 disaster where 12 climbers were killed on the slopes of Mount Everest, the 1985 incident in the Peruvian Andes where a climber had to cut the rope and cut away his partner in order to survive. Other examples where people have been trapped, such as the Chilean miners in 2010, or even the Thai boys in the flooded cave this year. All of those were examples where the people who were trapped, or the rescuers that helped them out, had to really adapt, think on their feet, change their plans, and work hard to survive. I remember being fascinated by a photograph that they released a few years ago of the body of George Mallory, who was a famous Everest climber. They found his body preserved almost perfectly in the snow 75 years after he disappeared. And what amazed me was that he was basically wearing a tweed suit, like he was going for a walk in a London park. So I just thought that's a perfect example of someone who's really not adapting to the environment and the circumstances that he was in. That's just bullishly pushing ahead with what he had with the plan, and of course he didn't survive. So applying this concept to procurement and supply management, when we say adapt or perish, it's about finding ways to stay relevant. So we're here on the cusp of the robotic era, and the threats of jobs being lost to AI is very, very real. If procurement doesn't find a way to carve out a human competitive advantage, then it's game over for the profession. And you might see that some of us have been wearing game over t-shirts today to really demonstrate this idea of we're coming to the end of things. AI isn't the only factor at play here. There are changing customer expectations when it comes to corporate social responsibility. There are rapidly moving macroeconomic events such as Brexit, you've got Trump and trade, you've got the China-US trade war, all sorts of things going on. And the very nature of how we work is changing as well. You've got the gig economy coming up, and you've got procurement needing to get ahead of the digital transformation wave.
So coming up next, we have Elizabeth Schlag-Lawrence, who will talk about shifting your procurement mindset to reach your summit, followed by Michael Ploiger of Roland Berger and how to win your procurement endgame, with a big focus on digital transformation. Then we have our MC Bruce Morrison. He'll take the stage to show us how to reach peak performance by mastering the #1 attribute in procurement.
And as with our first part of the day, we have lots of other useful content to share between each speaker presentation, including research findings, speaker interviews, and it isn't long now before we release part 4 of our Procurement 2030 report, produced in partnership with Procurious and Michael Page UK.
Don't forget to get involved in the Zurich Big Ideas Summer Group by sharing insights, making comments and asking questions. And then you'll be in the running to win a fantastic Paris Bebop 2 drone, along with a whole bunch of other really cool prizes, including Patagonia t-shirts and a Fjällräven backpack. Help us to spread the word on Twitter and LinkedIn by using the hashtag #BigIdeas2018.
And a reminder that all the speaker presentations, interviews with Trish and other great content for today are saved in the Procurious e-learning library as short micro-learning videos.
Adapt or perish. Now, we're not saying that procurement professionals will die in the snow if they can't adapt. But what we are saying is that they will rapidly become irrelevant if they don't shift their mindset to adapt to the changes taking place within and outside the profession. And that's the topic of our next speaker, Elizabeth Slagle-Lawrence. Let's cross to the stage.
You know, we've spent a lot of time in procurement talking about content, what we can do, what we're experts at, why we're an expert at it, how many years we've done this category, and why we're best at it, right? Spend a lot of time on that. So I kind of wanted to shake it up a little bit and talk about something totally different. And to me, the reason I'm talking about that is I really think it's what we need the most right now at this advent we're at. This advent we're at right now, we're going to have to be different, right? We talked about it at our roundtables. We're going to have to think differently. We're going to have to operate differently. We're going to have to behave differently. So how are we going to go about doing that? So at the end of this, I'll give you some first-hand examples of how you as an individual can actually walk away and nurture and grow some of those parts that are really going to be these strengths that hopefully will differentiate us in procurement. And hopefully by then we don't call ourselves procurement anymore. That's the next question, right, for a different conversation. So what's the current state? What are we dealing with? I think a lot of us are very familiar with that, right? When I walked into the business 28 years ago, a lot of us, right? I like A.T. Kearney's quote, they call it desktop procurement, right? When was the last time you actually went out to see a supplier? Have you even met the supplier? Have you been to the facility? Well, if you've been to the facility, have you been to the second tier facility? How about the third tier? Who's their logistics provider? Have you, you know? I think a lot of us are very guilty, right, myself included, having grown up in the space. It's always about input and output. And I showed the cogs on the wheel up here a little bit. It seems like some days in procurement, you know, I feel like some days we should still keep calling ourselves purchasing. Because it's kind of, which I'm a little allergic, I get hives when I say that word. To me, purchasing is what we do in some ways. Procurement, yes, that too. But it's just linear. My stakeholder comes to me, I react. I negotiate the contract, I do it, right? Okay, granted, there are some aspects of companies, and a lot of us also in our jobs try to be a little bit more innovative. But I think directionally, if we look at our space, we're not innovative enough. And to me, that's why I want to talk about mindsets. How can we, you know, Einstein talks about insanity being doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Isn't that what we're doing? Isn't that exactly what we're doing? We're doing the same process. Ooh, we even have established processes. Ooh, 6-step, 7-step. We can argue about it, which process is the right one, right? Isn't that doing the same thing? And all you're doing is applying that again over and over. So to me, no wonder our stakeholders often don't know our worth. How can they know our value? Today we were talking about, you know, maybe now we call ourselves, I don't know, the partner of choice. We can call it whatever we want to. But to me, in the end, if we're not clear about the value we're bringing and the mindset, that's to me the overarching thing, the umbrella that goes over all that, we're never going to shift. And quite honestly, we may not survive in the function we are today. So to me, mindset is your superpower. It's not so much the what you do, right? We all can't argue we know our content, hopefully by now, right? To me, that's foundational. I'm not saying knowledge and content is not relevant. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying that you have all this overarching knowledge and you give it an umbrella over that. The filter through which you operate is your mindset, right? I'll show you some examples later on this. To me, the how is the engine. How do I apply that? Again, a great quote by a Zen Buddhist monk, but I really like this. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few, right? And how many times do we, when you listen around the room in procurement, myself included, right? Ooh, I'm an expert on this, 28 years of that. Maybe we shouldn't be experts. Maybe that's exactly what's keeping us from thinking differently because we claim to be the experts on all these things. So let's disrupt that. What I like about this image, I'm not saying that the left-hand side of this brain is going to become irrelevant. I think that's what our future operating models are becoming, right? That's the AI, the Internet of Things, all the things we're talking about, becoming process-driven. And I also think that In procurement, there's a lot of need to be linear at times, right? You need to be responsive and you need to react in a certain process. But what I'm challenging us to do is spend a significant amount of time in your job on the right-hand side. Do this. That, to me, those are connections you may have not previously made with suppliers, with categories. Is there it's not always linear. So the suppliers you may have previously had, that might be nice, but maybe there's consolidation in the marketplace. Where is our procurement event, like the Uber, overused term, right? Or the Airbnb. But where is that? Honestly, when I started thinking about it, I don't know if I can come up with that many examples where we've been that disruptive. So when was the last time that you checked your brain? My son, who's 10 years old, was very funny. He saw this slide when I was working on it. He says, you know, Mommy, that's really insulting. And you know what's funny? To me, that's probably a natural reaction. And if we think about us, right, since when is it that being challenged is insulting? But isn't that exactly what we do? When we go see those stakeholders and we tell them, well, maybe you haven't been buying it the right way, dude, right? That maybe at that moment, those challenges that we bring to them is challenging somebody. Yes, we need to do it in a better tone. We need to do it the right way. We need to do it according to the right culture. But I do think that we need to check the way we're thinking. So some early examples that I've come across, but honestly, I would welcome everybody to give me more input on where they see things happening because, you know, there's some great things going on. There's a really cool commodity trading opportunity going on right now, and in an Amazon space, actually, they're trading chemicals and other commodities and categories in an Amazon-like environment. That's kind of innovative. Is it as disruptive as it could be today? But no, we've never done that. At least it's a start, right? Putting the generalists in the business, right? I just recently had somebody stolen in my previous company. He was amazing in marketing, and they wanted him desperately to sit in marketing. Be my guest. How fantastic is that, right? Infiltrate the organization, right? Become part of their mindset that they don't even notice anymore that you're procurement. That's really your superpower. And you know, a lot of stuff in contingent labor going on, and we talked about this earlier in category management. I really think that category management is reinventing itself and is no longer just a linear commodity approach to buying, but it's really becoming a strategic approach to going off to categories and translating your mindset to the business. So how do you do this yourself? How do you get your own superpower, right? What do you need to physically do? So one of the big things to me is the next time you sit in that meeting, and I know also on this broadcast, we're going to have people at different levels of their career. And to me, the next time you sit in that session, you know, challenge yourself that you actually ask around the room, listen to what's going on, and then say, okay, what are we really trying to achieve here, right? So many times we have these granular conversations and get caught up about the category, but what's the bigger picture? Go to those 30,000 feet. Be curious and be challenged. So also allow yourself to be challenged. There's a lot of learning and challenge, being challenged. Get that mindset that you want to grow, that you're not always the expert in the room. Secondly, insatiable growth, I call it. To me, I love that one because it's like, you know, the lid pops off, like on that image before, where you want to always grow, you want to innovate, you want to learn. Go to industry events, yes. But at those industry events, hook up with people that you end up finding interesting, but also people that you find upsetting, right? So find that person that you're like, wow, why does he think that way? That's kind of, you know, take that challenge. And I call them informational interviews. Dude, I grew up with that. The best way you learn is by patterning from people who do it best. They may only have a niche, but ask those people for their input. And then I think there's a lot of power in finding and being a mentor. Get yourself a great mentor, but also be a great mentor, because you can challenge yourself and your own limiting beliefs, right, is what people call it. Your limiting beliefs are what's holding you back. And those limiting beliefs many times can be disrupted in these kind of conversations. And last but not least, on insatiable growth, not always a popular topic in procurement, but learn from your suppliers. I think a lot of us in our careers probably had most of their learnings. For me, I would say a large amount of my learnings comes from my suppliers. Firsthand, sitting with them teaching me in the trenches, and then also listen to them where they think your gaps are. What are your weak spots? They will tell you. And if anybody knows them, they know them best, right? Sharpen your toolkit, a bit of a personal passion of mine. I think all of us should spend time in personal development. I think there's some, if you Google NLP, for those of you who like to get into these kind of topics, neuro-linguistic programming, why is it that we say when I sign that contract, or if I sign that contract? You should be saying when I sign that contract, right? We talked about it earlier, language, right? Shift your language. There are a lot of behavioral things that we should really train and become more ingrained on a daily basis. And last but not least, evangelize. We need to become more of these kind of people that go out and find familiar people that are in the same thinking, but also different thinking, but then go out and spread the word. And I put a helmet on this one because evangelizing doesn't always make friends. Sometimes evangelizing means a few people hit you over the head, right? And you get back up. So that's why I think that's an important one. And don't underestimate how much in my team, I call it petting the fur, how much you need to end up petting the fur. Go around, make sure everybody's good, and then kind of disrupt a little bit, but go around and make sure everybody's good again. It's really important to find that balance. So mindset is your superpower, and to me, in the end, the only way, to me, with all of us, when we think about in procurement, we're going to survive, all these white papers, oh my gosh, all this stuff we have to read, right? Blockchain, just this conversation alone today. What about this? What about that? What about all these categories? And then the influx and the risk mitigation and factories and third-tier supply base and outsourcing and, right? That's super overwhelming at times. Nobody can be on top of all of that. But to me, if you have the right mindset, it will help you filter through this influx of data and content and be able to sort it through and prioritize based on where you think the expansion lies for your field. And last but not least, to me, mindset goes back to your life. Only when you truly live your mindset, your open mindset, and everything you do in your real-time life will it connect with your work. Thank you for your time.
Considering how much procurement has changed in the last 10 to 15 years, we thought it would be a great idea to ask our 590 survey takers whether they expect the rate of change to slow down, remain the same, or speed up. The results show that people really do expect the rate of change to continue speeding up, boosted, of course, by the rapid adoption of AI and other digital technology. Think about how technologies such as the Internet of Things, blockchain, chatbots and 3D printing are really going to completely change the game. Now this raises the question that if procurement is going to change so much, do we need to rebrand? This is an ongoing debate in procurement and we've seen it discussed at conferences all over the world. Is procurement the right term? And does Chief Procurement Officer really encapsulate what a CPO does? Our research reveals that overwhelmingly people want to stick with the brand. But about 30% of our respondents said no, we do need to change, and put forward some pretty creative alternatives, including value creation officers, relationship management, and commercial consultants.
There's a boot camp on the site that people can access to drive peak performance. Tell me more about that.
Yes, we ran a campaign which was a 5-day podcast series with IBM Watson called Career Bootcamp. It was a series of 5 podcasts that helped give people, help to boost your procurement and supply chain career. One of my highlights from that was on the 5th day, we had 2 ultra marathon runners who came in and spoke about perseverance, determination, and how to make it work when you're under extreme pressure and how you can apply that to your business.
I'm now joined by Elizabeth Schlag-Lawrence. Elizabeth, good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me what, in your opinion, is the #1 factor holding people back from achieving peak performance in their career?
I think we always talk about what holds you back in your career. I think it's the same thing that holds you back in your life. To me, career and life are all interconnected. And to me, the biggest thing that holds people back, including myself, all of us have it. I think it's the chatter in our heads. It truly is, as absurd as it may sound, it is the thing, it's our limiting beliefs that make us think, have perceptions about us that are not true.
How do you know when you've reached the summit, when you've reached your career summit? How do you know?
I think the question itself that there is a summit is a bit sad because I think, to me personally, there should never be a summit, right? There should always be, I believe in insatiable growth, and I believe in always going what's next and what's exciting. And to me, to have a limit to that, to put a cap on that, I find unfortunate. So to me, I would say never accept the fact that there's a limit to your growth.
Excellent, I like that. Positive.
Thank
Elizabeth,
you.
thank you.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Got any burning questions? Need help from your peers? Need advice? Feel free to post these and anything else on the discussions board so that our community can answer you. Hot topics that are currently on the board include procurement and negotiation strategy for better results from suppliers. A good brainstorming session has been had on Procurious. How can you innovate the process to get better results from your suppliers? What are the best ways to work with them? What should be included in the contract? How long-term are you planning on working with them? These and other questions have been answered by the community, but you should get involved today.
Meet some really amazing people, go out, and then have informational interviews with them. Really say, how did you get into this? What did you think was interesting? What made you successful? And what didn't make you successful? Where did you fail? Where did you succeed? And to me, that's where your biggest growth occurs.
The one tip I would have is not to specialize too early, is to try a variety of different categories, both in the direct and the indirect space. Also to make sure that you're extremely familiar with the transactional side, the whole source to pay equation end to end, and also to try to get involved in some expertise, some innovation to improve your profession.
I guess challenging myself every day, and just by not wanting to do repetitive work and looking out for new challenges.
I'd say you are on the most exciting career in the whole world, and by 2030 you will be changing the world, because how we buy things, how we sell things, what's in those products are going to change the world. Nothing else has the power of this instrument, and you are very lucky to be in that job.
Be relevant, make sure what you are doing is exactly what your business needs to be done. Otherwise, if you're not relevant, you're not there.
Well, it's by knowing your peers and talking with your peers and understanding what their issues are and learning from them as well.
Well, I'd say come on board, right? This is a tremendously exciting place. It's very different from the organization that I joined, but it's the one part of an organization that touches every single part of the business, okay? So you get tremendous diversity. I think when I started, lots of people just fall into procurement. I started in sales, and for all the wrong reasons, I wanted to be the guy around the other side of the table, you know, be the buyer, be the guy who gets lots of suppliers in. Actually, it's now a very different organization. It's very much about driving change and creating value, and that's a really stimulating place to work.
Believe in it. Don't get lost in the jargon. You know, understand the jargon, understand the mechanics of what procurement's about and how good procurement makes a difference. And fundamentally believe you're doing a business job, and it just happens that you're in procurement.
Love your job, choose the right company to work for that provides you the right culture and the right environment to flourish. A good boss that is helping you to develop, and that's, I think, the most important thing.
A big part of future-proofing your career in procurement and supply management lies in your ability to adapt and be flexible as the digital transformation gains pace. Michael Ploeger is joining us to discover how to win your procurement endgame with a big focus on technology. Let's now cross back to the main stage.
And once you are a football world champion, the game starts all over again. I think we've experienced that very recently, and I think all the previous world champions have also experienced this. So it's more about going forward, going further again and again with this innovation, and we use it specifically to explain a concept which is around defining the future of procurement in the specific scenario of a client, which takes into consideration mega trends, which is hitting everybody, but which is also taking into account industry-specific disruptors. So in automotive, that might be autonomous driving. In telecommunications, that might be 5G, I think, technology. So talking about telecommunications, thank you for your introduction. I'm going to introduce another gentleman, my partner in crime, Detlef Schulz, Procurement Leaders Lifetime Award winner, chairman of the board of directors in the Vodafone Procurement Company, and I guess one of the most recognized and progressive leaders in the area of procurement. And I'm going to start with a quote where he says, "The traditional procurement function as we know it will cease to exist. It will not survive." And it's us all who own this function and who love this function to determine what we make out of it. And we see procurement at a crossroads, and you can make a left and start automating yourself out of the job, or you make a right and become the primary provider of business insight and business foresight and the value chain orchestrator. And let me explain what that means by using a case study that we've went through together. When this very Detlef Schulz approached me 3 years ago now and asked me whether I could help him with the digitalization. And of course, I didn't have a clue what it meant. So what do you do if you don't know what something means or you need an answer?
Call him a consultant.
That's a very good answer. That's a very good answer. So I need to reconsider whether I tell the truth. No, I tell the truth. What I did is I Googled it. So, and once you start Googling digital procurement, you find basically two things. One is old wine in new bottles, and the other one is cognitive experiments. And I couldn't go back with either option. So I was honest, like most consultants, and I went back and I said, sorry, I don't know. I just don't know. And I asked him what he thought, and he said, well, then it's two of us who don't know. And I did my research, and I had promised to help, and I was really getting nervous. And the one thing that helped me was a quote that I found from David Ben-Gurion. And this guy had said, all experts are experts in what was, and there are no experts in what will be. And if you want to be a leader in digital, if you want to be a leader in IoT, or whatever these new buzzwords are, then there are three things that have to replace experience. And this is vision, leadership, and collaboration. So we went back in this very spirit of vision, leadership, and collaboration and ran a series of workshops. Visioning workshops, design thinking workshops. And as much as I love to talk about it, time is running and I have to cut the long story short. At the end, our conclusion was the future role of procurement is determined by its unique position in the organization. Procurement is the function with the most interfaces in the organization. And that puts us in a perfect position to be the primary provider of business insight and business foresight. No other function has all this information from all inside and all outside the organization. So we can wait for somebody else to take over, but this is really the chance we have to take procurement forward to the next level. Every organization somehow has a category management methodology. Some consist of 23 steps, others consist of 7 steps. We looked into this and said, how can we automate it? And when you think, we had this discussion, you do a global category strategy. In order to be able to implement it at some stage, you need to collect all the relevant information from all your business units, from all geographies. And how do you do that today? Telephone, email, and this tells you how the information is coming back to you. Completely unstructured, inconsistent, some don't answer at all. A simple survey tool can help. It has quantitative analysis, it has analysis for technical specification, it can have multiple choice questions. So the information comes back in a consistent way from everywhere. It's still in the platform when the category manager has already left the company or the business partner has left the company. So it's a knowledge repository. It is a web-based training at the same time because it guides you through this process. 2 more examples and then I cut it short. A web crawler. You can use a web crawler to get hold of all this data avalanche. When, for example, in telecommunications, the category manager always searches for Apple and Samsung, at some point you will find out the reports are also always including Huawei. So artificial intelligence can improve your search algorithms. And then once you have this information available, the category manager, other than when I go into Facebook or on LinkedIn, doesn't say I like or I hate, but he starts classifying the information according to its relevance for the next process step. So this piece of information is relevant for my Porter's 5 forces analysis. This piece of information is relevant for my SWOT analysis, and this for my Kralitsch matrix. And again, the computer can learn how to do that. And then, slowly but surely, you start developing a pragmatic approach to use artificial intelligence in category management, and by this, preparing procurement for its future role. And if you are not a super complex organization, if you're not that mature, then it still helps you because you get this best practice into an intuitive workflow, boosting your category management capabilities and driving incremental savings. To show an end-to-end digital transformation journey from I couldn't care less to I don't know what it is, to what kind of capabilities would it be, to those are the capabilities, technology scouting, nothing out there, doing a co-innovation. And what I want to leave with you as a closing remark, and to give it the spin, how do you reach your career summit as a procurement professional? The thing that helped us most, and which I was referring to earlier, is this gentleman's quote: all experts are experts in what was. There are no experts in what will be. And if you want to be a leader in something new, a leader in the future, vision, leadership, and collaboration must replace experience. And I think this is very much the mindset shift that you need for digital transformation. We don't know what the skills are, but I think it takes a different attitude to prepare for the future of procurement. Thank you very much.
That was a fascinating presentation from Michael Ploeger, and it put me in mind of some of the findings from our 2030 research. To reach our summit in procurement, we're going to have to meet the challenges of Industry 4.0, but the question is, are our teams equipped to do so? We asked this as part of our research, and the answer was no. Only 38% of teams are regarded as having this capability. Let's have a look at some of the core procurement skill sets. This chart shows that some of the skill sets that will continue to be required, the skills closest to the top of the chart, such as data collection and analysis and market research, are regarded as having the highest automation potential. So what we'd advise people to focus on when it comes to skills development are the 3 very human skills with the lowest automation potential. That's determining customer needs, developing supply strategy, and delivering stakeholder value. And finally, let's have a look at some of the soft skills that are also regarded as potentially ripe for automation. The skills regarded as the most important here in this chart are communication, leadership, influencing, and relationship building. Fascinatingly, some of our survey respondents regard some of these skills, such as communication and leadership, to be prime candidates for automation as well. What does this say about leadership in procurement if people are just as happy to report to a robot?
Let's take a look at some of our top blogs on procurement skills. In 6 critical skills you need if you want to succeed in a digital world, we describe how procurement professionals must adapt in order to survive. Tanya Siri reminds us that life isn't fair and neither is your procurement career, in the biggest mistake leaders make on their way to the top. Often we think confidence is something that the lucky few are born with and the rest of us are left wishing for, but that's not the case. Michelle Sales shares 4 ways to cultivate real confidence and supercharge your career. If you want to hold on to your procurement career in the long run, you ought to be worrying about mastering your soft skills. Here are the 5 soft skills procurement pros should be developing now. IBM CPO Bob Murphy believes there is nothing more important than professional development and human relationships. Hear his advice to budding procurement stars in You're Finished If You Think You're Finished.
I'm now joined by Michael Ploiger. Michael, good to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Now, Michael, if there was one aspect of your presentation today that you would like people to take away, what would that one aspect be?
I think most importantly that it takes a different mindset to drive innovation in procurement, and that people need to have the courage to fail, because only if you fail you can drive true innovation and disruption. If you can buy something from the shelf, it's per definition not innovative. So if it's supposed to be innovative, you have to invent it. And this requires an attitude rather than a skill.
The subject matter of today is reaching your summit, peak performance. How do you know when you've reached the summit of your career?
I think you never reach the summit of your career, maybe.
There's always more, is there? There's always further to go.
Potentially you can always go further, yes, but I think it feels good once you've achieved an objective. And then you need to listen inside yourself whether there's more appetite for more. But I think it's not how much savings I've delivered, it's not which position I've achieved, it's not how many boxes I've ticked, it's more how does it feel? And once you can say, I've done cool things, I've delivered things that I can be proud of, then to me you've achieved the summit in your career.
Wise words. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
How do people find the roles in procurement?
About 20% found their current job through online job boards. I think that's really less. If you think about the market, 23% were headhunted, and 31% use their professional network. So if you ask me, I think professional network has started to become the main way to find a job. And even the ones who've not found a job through professional networks, I think they need to be really active on their professional networks to make sure they continue this journey in a sustained way.
Now, one thing that I hate doing is updating my CV. It's a real pet peeve of mine. Are CVs still in vogue? Are they still necessary, or have they been eclipsed by our online profile?
CVs are important, but I think not as important as your online profile, because even the managers who would recruit you based on your CV would definitely want to go and check your profile online. So you need to make sure your online profile is good and up to date. And there are three top things that you can do to ensure that. One is make sure you have a picture, a profile picture. Second is make sure that you show your thought leadership on online forums, ask lots of questions, answer lots of questions. And third, I know, which is quite cliched, is be yourself, because there's nothing worse than showing yourself as someone else on social media profile or professional network profile, and then when you finally sit in front of a manager, you are someone else. So be yourself is my final advice.
Be yourself. That's always good advice, isn't it?
I'd say go for it. As we define procurement now, it's ripe for automation. But the key parts of procurement are not being automated away at all. The key parts of procurement are around working with suppliers, negotiation, collaboration, innovation. A lot of that is highly creative and face-to-face.
Skills that we're going to need are going to be much more relationship-based. So how do we engage with our stakeholders? How do we engage with our suppliers in a far different way than we have done before, when actually the majority of that process is actually done by technology?
I think that traditional activity that we've been involved in that has been somewhat transactional in nature will be automated. There will be new technologies that emerge, a lot of robotic process automation and technology that we can leverage.
I'd suggest to them that it's not possible to automate the entire function. I think it's entirely possible today and into the future to move a lot of what we see as procurement work today into automated processes. But I don't think you're ever going to have automated processes that produce the relationships that occur between people.
To somebody who wants to automate the entire procurement function, I suggest they haven't worked in it. They don't understand it. they're still thinking about that transactional layer. Yeah, fine. The transactional stuff, that bottom left-hand Crowdrick stuff, yeah, automate it, no problem. But the minute humans are involved, I think that's a bit of an over-ambitious.
So I think you really need to maintain the thinking, and some of that is task management within your own function, and trying to automate the process, it's the tasks themselves, but don't outsource the tasks because they are the source of your actual knowledge of the business.
So we've actually done the analysis looking at what a procurement function currently does, and we broke down the source to pay activities into about 220 different tasks and said what can be automated, what can't be automated. And more than half of the tasks can be automated with today's technology. I think if you fast forward 10 years, even more can be done, so probably 80-90% of it. But you need to keep in mind that does not mean that a machine is running your procurement function. I think the human involvement is still important, in some ways becomes even more important in how you manage the automated setup.
I would say that's a great objective. I'd say it will be very challenging. I think it is possible, and procurement, as we all know, follow a lot of rules. So it can be codified and it can be automated, but it's very complex. It will take time and take a lot of attention to detail.
I would say good on you. I would say look at the journey and map out how far you can go on your automation journey. Now, McKinsey have just told us that they think in 5 years' time, 50% of the source to pay process will be automated. Others are saying 80 or 90. But I think what we have to do right now is actually map it out and consider how far we can go.
If it can be done, then yes, why not? Change will happen. If it can be done and it delivers the business benefits, then I don't think there's a problem with that. Things will change.
I think with the advent of things like Watson, the IBM's Watson, they'll be able to get some better smarts, computer-driven smarts, but I still think there's a key role for human intervention in certain parts of the process.
I think in the end, procurement, to be strategic, is about humans, it's about customer experience, human-centered design, understanding how we can make the journey that people take on a daily basis with procurement easier.
You should go, in parallel. You should have, utilise as much of the technology as possible, and that frees up your time to do some really strategic relationship, stakeholder management within your organisation.
It will change. It will change dramatically, but there'll still be a need for us.
Good luck.
That's great.
What I thought we'd do in this session is try and stimulate a little bit of thought-provoking conversation around all this change, right? If there's one theme that's come through during the whole course of today, it's around the amount of change that's happening to our function and how do we adapt to it. And of course, there's lots of areas that are still huge unknowns. And I wanted to stimulate that conversation and get us thinking. Because for me, one of the biggest challenges, not just for us as leaders, but for our organizations, is how do we prioritize, right? Given all of this change, where do we focus, right? Knowing it's so hard to navigate at the moment with so much change happening. And I wanted to start off with a question, right? Which is if that you had to pick one attribute for a modern procurement organization, what would it be? All right, and I want all of us as leaders, as procurement professionals, to think about that, right? We've got 10 minutes. Give it some thought. Think what you'd use to answer this question. And I'm going to illustrate it with a story from a personal experience that was a transition that I went through around my own personal approach to procurement that happened a few years ago. And hopefully bring it to life, because it was a bit of a wake-up call for me, and it may help in these times of such rapid change for the function. And then we can hopefully have a bit of debate at the end. But I'll start off with the question, right? So, and I'll give you a few pointers, right? So obvious things that leap out when looking at procurement and the key elements of a procurement function, a modern procurement function. You'd be forgiven first and foremost about thinking about people, right? Retaining talent, attracting talent into an organization, developing talent, we touched on it this morning, certainly crucial for any procurement organization. You could argue that people and bringing people into an organization is actually a byproduct of your strategies and your success, your brand as a company, but certainly it's a foundation for any good procurement organization. You may be thinking about innovation, right? Capturing external insights and ideas and being able to bring those into the organization through your suppliers and translate that into a commercial value for your business. And certainly there's plenty of mature procurement organizations that have been very, very effective at driving that innovation and stimulating commercial growth. Or you may be thinking about social impact. We just heard about the relevance there for Bitcoin and blockchain. And the tremendous work that's being done by procurement in the area of social impact, which is becoming more common these days. Or you may be thinking about more traditional areas like buy-in from the board, senior level engagement, even basic metrics like return on investment. Right? All of these are good attributes of procurement organization, right? Things that we all know and understand. But given all the change that's happening, right, I would argue that actually some of these attributes are growing, shifting in terms of their value. And I don't think they're the number one attribute that I would pick. Actually, when you look at the change, okay, I think this is one theme that has come through that over the course of the day is this change is a huge shift for procurement in terms of what it does, what it's accountable for. And I think there's a couple of things that clearly everyone is focused on. One is digital, all right, and I'm not going to talk at length about that. That's been covered ad nauseam to a certain extent earlier, but it's something that we're hearing more and more about. The one thing that I do see changing, right, quite rapidly that we know we can bank on is the buzzwords that we hear, right? Buzzwords that we hear at events like this over the last 2 years have undergone a change, right? Buzzwords like artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence, we heard earlier today, predictive analytics, robotic process automation, blockchain. These are all things that we're hearing about. The difference that I've seen in the last 2 years is that actually companies are really starting to think about what it means for them, all right? But it still strikes me as being quite isolated. Okay, a procurement function is doing it often in isolation. HR, IT are all looking at it separately as well. And there'll become a tipping point where actually that is driven at an enterprise level. Because the difference with these processes, right, is they touch all parts of an organization. It's not like the sourcing group management process, the category management approach, which was unique to procurement. These are shifts that are happening in business, okay? And that creates an opportunity for procurement, but it also creates a bit of a threat, I think, in terms of our ownership and our championing of the strategies associated with that, particularly when it comes to externalization. The second change I see happening is also if you were to say, well, okay, Bruce, actually digital, yeah, I hear about that, but quite honestly, I'm still struggling to understand who my suppliers are. I'm still struggling to embed global category management. That digital stuff is all well and good, but it's not going to impact me for 5-10 years. And actually, there's big organizations that I've worked out where that's still the case. We have multiple ERP systems. It's really hard to get things done. The process, the business is slow to react. Much more fundamental challenges. Even then, I would say that procurement is undergoing a very significant shift. Right? Just take the buyer-supplier relationship. Okay, that's changing. Right? The category management that I grew up with over the last 20 years has actually been quite effective. Industries have changed. We're working with fewer organizations. The CEO of certainly my organization is no longer just speaking to the head of advertising, the major advertising company that we do business with, but she's also speaking to our logistics company. She's also speaking to our head of soft services, our CEO of soft services company that we use. And so the role of procurement and the activity associated with it has been elevated, right? Not necessarily procurement, but certainly the external world. Companies are becoming more and more dependent on external companies. That line between what's done internally versus externally is actually becoming increasingly blurred. And as companies move their critical mass of activity outside the organization and become more dependent on companies like Google and Facebook, but also, one logistics provider, actually the role of procurement to play a bigger role in the company around those decision making, it's a huge opportunity for us. But we have to be able to step up. We have to be able to champion that, okay? So big shifts that are happening in the nature of procurement that we need to address. Now, against all of that background, it creates a huge opportunity for us. But against that background, I wanted to share a personal story, right? And my personal story actually is not a success story, right? It's the story of a transition that I went through. But I'm sharing it because I think the biggest challenge for us as leaders is how to prioritize with all of this activity, with all of these new levers that are at our disposal. It's no longer as simple as it was to just drive good category management and save a bunch of money for the business. Actually, procurement's role now is becoming quite different, all right? And we've heard that over and over again, and has the potential to be something dramatically different from where we are today. We heard about the skills and attributes that are needed, but I think it starts with the mindset, with understanding what's important to a company. And my story starts 8 years ago when I was asked to head up the research and development function for the procurement function for GlaxoSmithKline, a £30 billion healthcare organisation. And it was a role I had a bit of apprehension around. Why? Because my two predecessors had been in that role, and they'd struggled, right? It had not been easy. Why? Because the scientists certainly at GSK are incredibly intelligent, right? They're used to working with external companies since they started in the laboratory at 16, 17 years old. So they know the market in many cases better than the procurement professionals they were working with. Actually, they don't place that much importance on things like savings, right? They're focused on other stuff. So it's quite a challenging space, perhaps the most challenging space to work in a big pharma company as far as procurement's concerned. So I went into that role, and I thought, well, I'm going to give it my best. So I started to apply lots of the levers that had worked for me well elsewhere in the organization. I restructured the team, put in global category management. I understood what we were spending, what we were buying, started to drive big improvements, reduced the supply base by half, doubled the savings, et cetera, et cetera. And 2 years into the role, I had the opportunity to sit down with the chairman of R&D, and I talked about all the great stuff we were doing, and he nodded and smiled, and he was pleased, but he wasn't excited. Right? He wasn't excited, and those of you know what I'm going to say next, right? I wasn't aligned to his objectives. I was focused on what was making my CPO happy at the time, right? Which was delivering lots of savings, driving a huge simplification program. But I wasn't speaking the same language as the chairman of R&D, right? He was measured on a couple of other things, right? And it took me a few days of scratching my head to really think about what was most important to him, right? What is his boss asking from in R&D, right? Two things. One, new molecules, right? So there's an innovation element to his role. And then secondly, to bring those molecules to market, to commercialize them as quickly as possible, speed. And I wasn't really doing anything about either of those. The first one is very hard to influence. It's internal. We have a discovery team. Doesn't really touch the external world. But the second one I could do something about. And so I took a decision. I agreed with the CPO. We were going to change our metrics to focus on speed and focus on the critical path of bringing new drugs to market and to measure the impact of the external world on our milestones. And we set targets. And I can tell you, right, genuinely, the change was overnight, right? We had projects prioritized, we had projects resourced, we were speaking the same language, and most importantly of all, right, procurement's delivery was recognized, right? And the savings still came, but the contribution we were making to the organization was an easier conversation to have. Now, why do I share all of that, right? Because in these times of change, right, when we're asking ourselves what we need to prioritize, we need to be thinking about what is most important to the organization. And the answer to the question, right, that I started this presentation with, right, is we must stay relevant. We must stay relevant. This is not black and white. Just because there's a digital transformation doesn't mean to say you have to do it right now, right? There's nothing wrong with good category management. It still delivers value, huge value to the organization. It will change, but the pace of change will be driven by us, should be driven by us. But perhaps the most important thing is for procurement to really think about what role it wants to take, right? It can either be a supporter of this change, or it can be a champion of this change, because this digital transformation will impact entire supply chains. And procurement is right at the apex, right at the center of this, to be able to lead it and drive it. But if we're not careful, it'll be driven by somebody else. But that may not be appropriate for your organization. If your company is declining, if profit is actually the most important, then cost is still going to be the number one criteria. But whatever we do, we need to stay relevant.
Thank you, Bruce, for that excellent presentation, and thank you again for being such a great MC for our summit today. Now, I've been thinking about the concept of irrelevance and how it applies on a couple of levels here. So on the individual level, it's about allowing your own skill sets to become irrelevant. That's a big danger no matter what profession you work in. But it's also about the procurement profession sliding down the side of that mountain into irrelevance if they don't continue to adapt to changing circumstances. So let's have a look at some of the hurdles holding the profession back from reaching its summit. You can see here that a lack of focus beyond cost savings is number one. I think it's safe to say that if you still believe procurement should be solely about cost savings, then you're going the way of the dinosaurs. A lack of influence is another big factor inhibiting peak performance, and we heard some very useful advice from Michael Ploeger earlier today about how better communication can help remedy this. But what really stands out for me in this chart is the fifth point down. Goals and targets unaligned with the organisation. This takes work and it's a never-ending task because, as we all know, the organisational focus can keep shifting. A CPO might run a 6-month project to ensure every procurement goal is firmly aligned to organisational targets, only to discover that an incoming CEO or CFO changes all those targets the next day. It's frustrating, but there's no point complaining. You need to realign. Look at your reporting, check out your KPIs, review your purpose, your values, your mission. If there's any area where procurement seems to be beating its own path, pull it back into match step with those organisational goals and values and targets.
Now, I understand you've been recording CPOs and other thought leaders from around the world. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, so we run 4 Big Ideas Summits globally throughout the year. At each one of these events, we have the top senior level chief procurement officers and heads of procurement in attendance. We ask them to present in front of our film crew at every event and answer the question, what is your big idea for the profession? We have a huge library of videos with all of these fantastic speakers on our site on procurious.com.
Thank you, Robert. And I'm now joined by Bruce Morrison, who not only is emceeing the event today, but he's also just given a presentation. Bruce, good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
What would you like people to take away from the presentation that you've just given?
Well, the purpose of the presentation was really to flag to people how important it is to be relevant in procurement. And it sounds really obvious, but the amount of discussions that I have with procurement professionals where they're struggling to get buy-in with senior leadership, they're struggling to get their projects resourced, it forced me to, and I illustrated it with a story from my own experience of why being relevant is fundamental, okay? You may be doing a huge amount of procurement activity, delivering enormous value to the organization, but if it's not aligned to the company objectives, then there's always going to be a disconnect. And for me, asking yourself the question around everything you're doing, is it relevant, is particularly important today when we've got things like digital and the function itself is going through such dramatic change. It's an exciting time to be in procurement, but also it's a bit bewildering. And so the need to prioritize is greater than ever before. And that's why I think you need to be asking yourself the question, is what I'm doing, is what my team doing relevant to the success of the business I'm supporting?
Now, obviously, the theme of today is about peak performance and about reaching that summit. How do you know when you've reached your summit?
Well, I thought this was a great question because actually, you know, how do you know? And do you even reach it, right, is the first question, because there's so much change happening today, right, whether it's in the procurement function, that I think actually the days of when you just started a job when you were 18 or 20 and you carried on through until 65, just growing up the ladder, I think those days are behind us, actually. We're constantly having to reinvent ourselves. The world is moving too fast. Staying in one company is becoming actually quite unusual these days. And so we're forced into reinventing ourselves. And achieving a career summit, for me, I don't think it's something that actually you ever achieve, because the world is moving too quickly. And there's always something fresh and something stimulating that's going to require you to adapt and do something different, right? And hopefully, as you grow older, you understand what really motivates you, and you're able to then focus on that and derive pleasure from that. So I think the concept of a career summit, I'm not sure whether that still exists today.
Bruce Morrison, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
As part of Procurious's Gen Next research, we asked 500 procurement pros if they'd ever crowdsourced a solution to a business problem on social media. 77% said no, 23% said yes. Of the 23% who answered yes, the vast majority said that the reason was because they wanted to tap into a diversity of ideas. Other reasons for crowdsourcing solutions online include the wisdom of the crowd, speed of response, and the fact that it's easier than trying to solve a problem alone. That's why we built the discussions board on Procurious, to give our 32,000 plus members the opportunity to ask questions, share best practices, and crowdsource ideas with the global procurement community. If you've got a procurement problem that you can't solve alone, we can bet that there's someone out there who has the answers you're looking for, whether they're from India, Australia, Portugal, or Brazil.
I stay relevant by just making sure I'm doing what my partners need me to do.
I stay grounded.
Don't stay in procurement. And what I mean by that is think about how you contribute to the other parts of the business. I'll give you a statement. It's going to take longer, but I'll give you a statement. It was once a very famous general that said, "I never knew the purpose of the army until I got out of the army." And so understand procurement in that same frame. Understand for procurement what procurement is from outside of procurement. And so don't stay in procurement. Go out, come back, go out, come back. Learn something from the rest of the company.
The question you have to ask is it relevant to the business I'm in? Is it supporting the business objectives? Is it really delivering value in a way that I can articulate my contribution to the success of the organization?
Be open. Be brave enough to fail. Challenge things. Challenge yourself.
For me, it's the insatiable growth, and it's a matter of learning through everything you do. Don't limit yourself to exclusively procurement-related things. Go beyond.
Relevant is by being curious, is staying alert, staying alive to news and to opportunities, and curiosity is a key skill for any procurement person, I believe.
I stay relevant by networking vastly internally with multiple functions, constantly. A network junkie, some might call me. But more importantly, and perhaps equally equal, is to network externally with your procurement peers, to go to activities like this, online, of course. You can do that whilst you're killing 2 or 3 minutes online anytime you like. Or you can also go to events, and there's plenty of those around, locally based. As a chairperson of SIPS, we have lots of them at a local level.
Be passionate about what you do, making a difference to the organization you work for, and do that, of course, in the overall context, not as a function, but as a company.